The Chief of Staff to the Mayor of the City of Detroit, Alexis Wiley.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm so glad to see so many people here this early. Yesterday, as I was walking around, people were saying, oh yeah, I really want to go to your panel, but next time, Alexis, can you make it an hour later? So I'm glad to see so many people here, but this is a topic that is certainly worth getting up early for and really having a deep conversation. When you talk about Detroit's resurgence, Detroit's growth, what's next for the city, aside from education, there's no conversation more critical than investing in our workforce, creating opportunities for people who live in the city of Detroit. You hear announcements about companies like Sakti that are expanding their footprint, investing $30 million into an existing site and also building a training center. There are companies investing in the city. There are companies coming. What our job is to make sure that every single Detroiter has access to an opportunity to land those jobs that are really going to be the future of this city. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists, a group of people who wake up every morning thinking about how we can expand opportunities, how we can make sure that we are building a talent pipeline and really investing in our workforce. And before I go too much further, I do have to thank JPMorgan Chase for the work that they're doing. And pretty soon you're going to hear from Chauncy, and he's going to talk about the study that they just commissioned that really gives us a sense of what the landscape in the city of Detroit is when it comes to workforce training, and really the opportunities and challenges. And it really provides a critical roadmap for us. So thank you very much, Chauncy, for the work that you and JPMorgan Chase are doing. All right, I'd like to introduce William Jones. He is CEO of Focus Hope. Pam Moore, someone who I work with very closely, have tons and tons of respect for, President and CEO of Detroit Employment Solutions. And Faye Nelson, Vice President of Public Affairs for DTE Energy and President of the DTE Energy Foundation. And Chauncy Lennon, Managing Director of Global Philanthropy for JPMorgan Chase. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you all. You can stay out extra late tonight. I give you permission because you got up early this morning and made it here. So what I'd like to do is first we're going to roll a short video that talks about JPMorgan Chase's partnership with Detroit. Then I'm going to talk about some of the research we've recently commissioned. A copy of one of the reports is there on your table. And then we'll have a conversation with the panelists here. So why don't we start by rolling the video.
Detroit is a great, iconic American city.
There are many things that make Detroit great. I'd start first and foremost with its people.
Detroit people have grit. They are persistent. They have tenacity.
Tough, hardworking, but friendly.
We've been part of the Detroit community for 80 years. The future of Detroit is something that we have a vested interest in.
JPMorgan Chase is really on the leading edge of investing in Detroit's revitalization.
There are so many opportunities in this city.
Our values have always been to support your clients, support your communities. We don't see any conflict whatsoever in terms of doing both. So Detroit's critical to us. We've been there. We want to see it thrive. We want to see it grow. We happen to be a very big company, but we take it very personally that way. And here we're doing is not just philanthropy, it includes philanthropy, and that's helpful because sometimes philanthropy is needed, but it also includes things like community development.
This capital will help build charter schools, affordable housing, help small businesses and neighborhoods throughout Detroit.
We're taking abandoned houses in the city and we're auctioning them. And what JPMorgan Chase is doing is enabling people to get mortgages to move in.
What JPMorgan's investment in Focus Hope allows us to do is to train more students and to make certain that there's a birth to college pipeline for people.
In Detroit, we're actually bringing the full force of JPMorgan to bear. Philanthropy, technology, finance, community development, and we're doing all of that in the revitalization of Detroit.
Some of our money is going to help with the completion of a big project called M1 Rail, which is going to connect the Midtown and the downtown areas.
The revival is really taking place. The downtown and the Midtown area are really bustling.
We have huge numbers of young people moving into Detroit.
The bankruptcy is over. The street lights are being turned back on. Businesses are coming back in.
One of the things that I think is really exciting about this partnership with JPMorgan Chase is that they really did their homework.
They came in and spent a huge amount of time understanding the workings of the government, understanding the workings of the neighborhood and the business community. There isn't a day goes by that somebody isn't in my office with a plan for a new apartment building, a plan for a new business, a plan for a new office building. It's very exciting.
I hope it will spark other companies to follow us and make similar commitments.
This is aggressive stuff that the bank is doing, and we are most appreciative. This allows us to do what we do to fulfill our own mission and purpose.
If we can see small businesses created, people going back to work, neighborhoods filled again with families and children, that's going to be a great thing for Detroit, and it's going to be a great thing for all of us.
It'll eventually be an example of great American resilience.
All right, well, thank you. And as you heard, we focus very much on using data, really understanding a problem as part of our engagement and developing a strategy. And nowhere has, when it comes to workforce, that has been very much our approach as well. And so what I want to do now is talk about some of the research we've done recently on some of Detroit's workforce challenges to give us all a common frame of reference before we start having our conversation with the panelists. So let me move the slides ahead here. I want to go to the next slide, please. So I want to do three things. I want to talk first about the workforce in Detroit. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of opportunities we're seeing in the Detroit labor market. And then I'll end by talking a little bit about the kinds of system opportunities and challenges we're also seeing. So first, let's talk about some of the characteristics of Detroit's employed and unemployed residents. So one of the first things you see when you look at the data is that labor market participation in Detroit is less than in neighboring counties and compared to the nation as a whole. So the labor pool includes only 61% of Detroit residents aged 16 to 64. So that's 275,000 residents. So we have lots of folks who are out of the labor market. It's an important thing to keep in mind because as we're seeing now nationally, as economies improve, what you see is that people want to come back into the labor market. So this is not a static challenge. As things get better, we'll actually expect in some ways the workforce challenges to seem intractable because we'll have more people re-entering as current people who are looking for jobs find jobs. The second point is that working residents tend to earn low wages and work outside the city limits. So almost 1/5 of working Detroiters live in poverty, even though 31% of workers in poverty work full-time. Right? So this is a big challenge. People are working full-time and are not earning wages that get them over the poverty line. A second point to recognize is that Detroit residents tend to leave the city to find work as their skill sets don't match those of skills required for many jobs in the city. This is true in other cities, but our research suggests that Detroit, this is a problem that is unrivaled. Detroit's, partly because of its the downward cycle of investment for many years now, you don't have a lot of the entry-level jobs that you often see in retail and customer service that are often people's first stepping stone into the labor market. So people are having to travel outside the city for many of these jobs. Let's go to the next slide. Low educational attainment rates are driving low labor force participation. Working Detroiters have higher educational attainment than non-workers. 18% of workers have a BA compared to 13% of all Detroiters and 7% of those not in the labor force. So it's important to recognize that there'll need to be more opportunities for people to gain skills and credentials as part of their reattachment to the labor market. And in general, unemployed Detroit residents have lower education and literacy skills. We can say more about that in the conversation, but this data is not as comprehensive as some of the other data, but this sample, I think, is reflective of the reality of the challenge. Let's go on to the next slide. Some final characteristics of the unemployed residents. African Americans are twice as likely to be unemployed as whites. Men are more likely to be unemployed than women. Youth are more likely to be unemployed, especially the youngest workers have very high unemployment rates. So again, these problems are tough and tougher for many specific populations. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So let's talk about, that's the supply side, if you will. Let's talk about the demand side of this problem. Detroit has too few jobs. There are about 258,000 jobs for 706 residents. So there's only jobs for 37% of the population. Now this is a high level, this is kind of a gloss, but it is useful as a way to compare the challenge to other cities. And again, Detroit is unique in the challenge it faces when it comes to this ratio of population to jobs. And it has fewer jobs in the private sector than other cities, especially in, again, these very entry-level jobs in things like retail, accommodation, and food service. The skills required by Detroit's employers tend to be higher than in the surrounding areas, resulting in significant incommuting to fill jobs that Detroiters can't. So we see that 71% of jobs in the city are held by non-Detroit city residents, who tend to have higher educational attainment, more likely to be white, and earn higher wages. Again, this is a product and part of the fact that many of the entry-level, lower-skilled jobs are actually not in the city or outside of the city. And when you look at other urban labor markets, you see a mix. And so, again, this is a unique challenge. Over time, this will shift as investment and the sort of retail presence in the center city grows. But for now, this is an important challenge. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, the report we shared with you on your table on the skills gap does contain some hopeful information. So when we think about the population folks who don't have high school degrees or just high school degrees, an opportunity often exists for these folks in what we call middle skill jobs. So middle skill jobs are jobs for people who have a high school degree, some post-secondary training and credentials, but not necessarily BA. And when it comes to middle skill jobs, we see that there are opportunities in the Detroit region. Middle skill jobs represent 17% of all jobs in the Detroit region, and that's about 320,000 positions. We see that there are going to be an increasing number of these positions over the next few years. Close to 10,000 middle skill jobs will be projected to open every year going forward. And many of these jobs will be in both the healthcare and manufacturing sectors. The job postings and anticipated retirements affirm a strong immediate demand for workers. So part of it is that these sectors will be growing. Part of it is that the incumbent workers in these sectors will be retiring. So the key point here to say is that there's an opportunity right now for people who don't have BAs if they can get the high school credentials and some technical or other sector-specific training to fill these positions. And the data shows us that employers are struggling to fill these positions. Often these positions are staying open for longer than you would expect, or compared to other kinds of positions that are filling more rapidly. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'll just end up here with a few words about what we see in terms of the system, what exists right now in terms of training opportunities for folks to get the skills that can get them into some of these jobs. So there is a need for a wide range of work readiness programming and skills training provided by the typical workforce development providers, as well as community and economic development organizations. So this is a big problem. We're going to need lots of different programs and service providers engaged in developing a solution. One thing we're seeing is that there's an increasing focus on career pathway models. So this reflects a practice across the country that simply placing someone in any job is not as effective as working with somebody to really identify a career opportunity that they want to aim for. And what we know across a lot of different training opportunities is that simply sort of a jobs-first approach does not work as well as helping somebody learn skills that are related to a sector and then enter into a sector where they have aspirations to move on to a higher skill, higher wage job. And what you see is many service providers are developing programs and services that are part of this community pathway, the career pathway approach. Let's move to the next slide. Now, there are deep complexities to aligning Detroit's workforce infrastructure to its industry mix and labor pool. And again, Detroit is not unique in this regard, but making sure that we get the demand side at the table, really signaling and articulating what skills they need so that the supply side, the training providers, the educators, the community colleges, can be smart about designing curricula, developing the skills that are linked to this demand. That's an ongoing challenge and one that Detroit will have to wrestle with like the rest of the country. And overall in Detroit, we see a range of the system workforce partnerships are very complex. There are examples of strong partnerships, and there are a series of initiatives that are but these initiatives often are struggling for enough funding. Often the coordination is a challenge, and often they're not connected to each other. And this speaks to some of the data I've talked about earlier. You've got people with low skills. Sometimes they're not ready for some of the more advanced training. So how do you build programs that are sequenced, that let people develop a set of fundamental skills, that build to more advanced skills, that then give them a labor market traction? And then the size of the investment, our research suggests that there's about $119 million being invested on a yearly basis. 60% of that is federal funding, 12% is state, and the rest is coming from kind of philanthropic sources. So let me end there and turn now to our panel members and get them to respond to this data and their own experience working in the system. So I'm going to start with Pam. Can you, reflecting on the data that's just been shared and thinking about the role DESC plays, what do you think the biggest workforce challenges are right now for Detroit?
So there's several. Low education attainment is probably the most critical issue that we deal with. Because there are more and more middle-skilled jobs coming to Detroit, we don't have the workforce to fill those jobs. And as your data show, if you have less than a high school diploma, there are very few jobs for you in the city of Detroit, and so you have to go to the suburbs to find those low-skilled jobs. And so that brings up the transportation issue, which is our other huge barrier for Detroiters. Mayor Duggan is working on lowering our insurance rates. However, currently we just don't have reliable public transportation to get to the suburbs and back to even go and get that $12 an hour. So the challenge is the pipeline of talent for these jobs that are currently in demand, which for those that were in the session about education, you've heard the data on our public schools in Detroit, and so our pipeline of talent is challenged, not prepared properly. Literacy is a huge issue in the city of Detroit, and so it's a very big issue. But there are many of us, we're working better than we have in many years. There are many workforce agencies in the city of Detroit doing this work, but we are disconnected. We do need more bridge programs like Focus Hope has to bring people up to the levels that they need to be to get that vocational training that they need to get that middle skill job that pays $20 an hour that can support a family. So that's just some of the challenges.
So, William, I'd like to hear your thoughts, given your perspective from the service provider, training provider end.
Sure, I think, I think that Pam articulated it well. The educational challenges are well known out of any group or of folks who come to Focus Hope looking for, and primarily they come looking for a job. They don't walk in the door saying, I want training. They walk in the door saying, I want a job. We have to assess them and where they are. And 2/3 of any group, I can guarantee, I'll bet a paycheck on it, will not pass 9th grade reading, 9th grade math. Okay, period, end of story. So you've got to work very hard to make certain that people have those foundational skills, those basic skills. I think another challenge too is truly making certain that we understand the needs of business, okay, in that regard. Because the business needs are here, the workforce is here, we've got to develop strategies that are going to meet them not only where they are today, but where they're going to be tomorrow. And I'm really pleased. I thought that this session would be one where we could, so few people, we could probably share one cup of coffee. But in this room right now today, we've got policymakers, we've got manufacturers, we've got big manufacturers, medium-sized manufacturers, laborers in the room, educators are in the room. Everybody's here to have a great conversation on this topic and hopefully develop more strategies. And those numbers on the investment, too, are a huge challenge because we're starting at such a deep hole. This is not something that you're just going to wave a magic wand and say, we'll sprinkle a little money on it and solve the problem. These are deep, entrenched problems and have to be solved with sustained strategies over time.
I want to pick up on one point you made about people coming to you just looking for a job.
Right.
How much of this is sort of just an information challenge, right? If people knew more about certain kinds of opportunities, middle skill jobs, certain sectors, would that change their thoughts about, you know, why it's worth pursuing training?
Yeah, I think that it would, but remember, we're talking about a population, most of them can't read at a 9th grade level. So the information challenge is even greater to make certain that we hit them with a message where they want to hear it, when they want to hear it. So I would tend to agree that that's a big, big part of it.
Great. So Faye, let's hear about how employers see this issue and what your perspective is on what needs to be done.
Well, let me just first say that I'm very glad that this year the Chamber is focusing on the key issue of not only talent, urban revitalization, but cohesion. Because I think all of those topics are elements of what is going to be critical from an employer's perspective as far as supporting communities like Detroit from a revitalization perspective. I mean, jobs are huge, training is absolutely critical, and we see the most challenging area as being, as Pam and William have indicated, just the whole education and training gap. I mean, there are so many jobs, these middle skill jobs that are coming online, from, you know, the M1 rail to bridge to the new stadium to the conversion from the public lighting to DTE. And we are going to need workers that have the skill, have the training, that have more than a high school education. And so the challenge is there, and over the next 5 to 7 years, we're also going to see a significant drop in our middle skilled workers in light of retirements. Mm-hmm. So we're very, from DTE's perspective, and I would say certainly from the employer's perspective, we're all very, very interested in how do we join together to lift up our communities like Detroit. But we're going to have a pipeline issue. We're going to have an issue that we have got to identify skilled workers to fill these positions. So there are many challenges, not only, you know, obviously the education and training, but it's very reflective in the unemployment numbers that we've heard. Listening yesterday to the session, the governor indicated that statewide, there's the unemployment has now dropped to, I believe the number was 5%. But yet, you know, reviewing the data, now those figures are staggering when you look at Detroit proper, where African American males, 15% unemployment, Latinos 14%. And then you look at the significant percentage of the poverty, all directly connected. And so how do we as a community work again to lift our communities up? And so again, jobs clearly are critical. We're very, very interested in joining with others to do whatever we can do in order to move that needle forward in a positive way, reduce those numbers.
Great. So let's think about, you know, what are the concrete steps? If you could, you know, sort of say, all right, I've got my 3 top priorities. Here are the things that I feel like if we could begin to really focus in on these issues, you know, it's obviously going to be a collaboration between all the sort of the legs of the workforce stool, education and training providers, job seekers, employers. Pam, let's start with you. What do you see as, you know, the priorities we should be really thinking about and moving forward on right now?
I'd say education is number one. Linking our educational programs to real jobs and real opportunities in the city of Detroit. I visited some linked learning schools in San Diego where employers are engaged. It's project-based learning for young people, all tied to real careers in that community. I think we have to have more employer engagement, as William mentioned, and usually when we interface with employers, they come to us with what their needs are right now or what their needs are in the next 90 days. We need to be more strategic and plan better with employers what their needs are going to be. So I would say education, I would say better employer engagement, and literacy. The literacy and the bridge programs that we need to get people where they need to be in order to get this training that's in demand for these middle skill jobs.
That's great. You know, I would just want to underscore a couple of points being made here. It's that, you know, in some ways the challenges of the workforce are more about execution than anything else, right? How do we actually get folks to the table, employers, you know, signaling what they need now, what they need, as Pam said, in the future, right? Because we have to design pipelines that get people skills across, you know, a multi-year horizon. And that takes a lot of effective coordination, getting people to work together. Never easy, but in some ways, when you think of it as an execution challenge, it feels a little less daunting in my mind. The second is that you know, we know what works, right? We know, as Pam mentioned, the linked learning effort really is about giving young folks work-based learning experiences, getting them into the kind of internships or apprenticeships or other kinds of opportunities to learn skills in the workplace. That's what employers are looking for, are the skills that they're going to use when they hire people. So the more we can tighten that link, I think the stronger our workforce programs have been, and we see that across the country. William, your turn. What are your top 3 priorities?
Excuse me. Well, I agree with Pam. Education's absolutely essential, and that's forward-looking. We also, in our top priorities, look at the recovery of people who have been poorly served by the education system, not just last year, year before, but for decades, and have been left behind as we've seen this economic resurgence in the past 6 or 7 years or so. So we focus a lot of attention on recovering folks. In that recovery, part of it is also people who are returning from prison and other situations, because they're entering those numbers in fairly large numbers in the city of Detroit. And we've got to pay attention to that population. And I could go on and on about sentencing reform, but I won't, okay, and how essential that is. But policymakers, it's extremely important. We don't need people hamstrung by the fact that they've got a criminal record, especially for nonviolent offenses. It makes absolutely no sense. Our other top priority in that regard, too, is making certain that we stop referring to essential skills as soft skills, okay? The manufacturers in this room are going to tell you they don't care what somebody knows if they can't come to work on time every day. That is not a soft skill, okay? That requires mentoring. It requires reinforcing so that people understand that you're there to add value, all right? You're not there to just show up when you want to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have to add value in order for this economic engine to work. And, well, I'll leave it at that as far as priorities. I can get wound up in those.
Let me just follow up on that. When it comes to these set of fundamental skills,
yep.
What do we know about what works? What can we do that actually moves the needle on that issue?
I think you have to change the whole equation and the mindset. You know, I've talked to young men on the street right outside the Focus Hope campus. I've said, look, I need a job. You're the guy who runs Focus Hope. Can you help me find a job? Yeah. And I said, yeah, absolutely. We've got training programs. She said, does this mean I have to give up smoking weed? Yes, it does mean you have to give up smoking weed. And before you start a training program, we're going to test you for that, because there's no employer that I know of who's going to take you, all right, if you're smoking weed. But it was in his mind, you know, whether he learned it in the barbershop, or, well, he hadn't been to the barbershop in a while. But whether he learned it elsewhere, there's these myths out there that you can sort of mask results, et cetera, and people want to engage in potentially self-destructive behaviors, okay? And then we rigidly enforce the idea that you can't be late. I don't care if you've got to take 2 buses to get there, if you've got to leave home at 5 o'clock in the morning. All right, there are people in this room that are going to tell you they can't use somebody who's late to work. Right? Absolutely can't use them. You've got to be able to work in a team is another essential skill in that regard, and that includes learning conflict resolution, okay, in ways that it's not the streets anymore, folks. We're going to resolve these things in the proper way, in the proper situation. Turnover is extremely expensive to manufacturers. If they can't find the talent that they need, they're going to go elsewhere, okay, whether it means relocating a plant or relocating an operation, whatever it takes, they're going to go elsewhere.
No, I think, certainly I hear this in our work across the country. You know, we don't really appreciate how much even entry-level jobs these skills around teamwork are just critical, right? That we really, the way our labor market has shifted is that even what looks like a job that doesn't require a whole lot of skills requires a lot of these kind of interpersonal skills, not just simply the sort of getting there on time, but knowing how to interact with both customers, with other workers, and we don't have a system that's really training people, preparing them for that kind of expectation. So the employers, when the employers, from your perspective, you look at this situation, what do you feel like needs to happen right now to get us on the right track?
Well, I think in following William's comments, I think employment of youth is going to be very, very important. We can look at today's workers and the challenges that they face and try to work in a variety of remedial ways in order to connect those dots to move them to these middle-skilled jobs. But let's talk about how we begin. And beginning with the youth, I think, is going to be very, very important, or will continue to be very important. DTE, we are really focused on supporting youth employment, and very pleased to be part of the Mayor's Grow Detroit Talent Program, in which a significant percentage of the $1 million that we annually spend is devoted towards that program. But it's just not hiring youth, it's providing them with the services that William has indicated, providing them with wraparound services, helping them to understand the fundamental skill set that employers need, mentoring them. And so I think beginning very early on in the process is going to be absolutely key as we look to begin to build that pipeline of workers for the future of Detroit. Or our communities. But I think, to go back to, or to return to your initial question, I think it's essential that there be a common mission and vision. That as a community, from the employer side as well as those individuals that are developing and training individuals for the workforce, that we have to have a common vision and mission and alignment and goals to really focus on how we move our region, how we move our cities forward. Otherwise, we're all, there's a lot of good works that are in play right now. The employer needs are all over the map, but if there isn't a coming together collectively of our community, that's going to continue to be a major challenge. And then I think also, again, as was mentioned, the whole education and training space, absolutely critical. Employers are going to have to be, we're going to have to be very specific or continue to drive to ensure that the needs are very clearly articulated. And so to that extent, we've got to lean in. We can't just stand back and just expect for all of this good stuff to happen so that we can get the workers that we need. So we're going to have to be very strong participants on the education side. There's a lot of dollars that are spent, not just by DTE, by Chase, and other companies, but and so it's not as much that we need to spend more, but really leveraging our dollars to support, for example, those nonprofits that are providing the critical training, helping to address the critical enhancement of skill needs in order to assist individuals in being able to connect to these jobs. There are critical literacy issues. There are critical, again, unemployment and poverty issues. And so we've got to come together again, I think, to pool our respective resources in order to support those training needs. I also think that it's very important to, going back to the youth, we've got to look at our schools. The mayor spoke yesterday, and there were panels as well that focused on the landscape, education landscape of the city of Detroit. We're very interested in the career and technical training piece of this. How can we, again, lean in more to support schools, for example, like Randolph, being able to support the students there with whatever the needs are in order to help to move that needle forward from an education standpoint. So there's so many different ways in which we've got to embrace this issue. But at the end of the day, I believe that coming together, collaborating, being more aligned, developing a partnering workforce development plan in which there's clear communication on both sides of the coin on what we need in order to move our community forward, supporting the education and training needs, collaborating and leveraging our respective resources, and again, finally, really supporting our youth and growing programs so that we can employ our youth, and that our employment programs are there's transparency connected with these programs so that we can connect with our community to hire these youth.
No, I think you said a lot of really, I think, important things. I think I would emphasize certainly this interesting role that employers, often recognizing that, when it comes to things like summer youth programs, there's a need to really think about what is the right way to provide a useful skill experience, right? It's not simply, we're going to get kids here and we're going to sort of have them off the streets for the summer. It's really about what is it that we want to think about? What are the right set of skills that somebody who's in high school needs to know? What are the right set of skills that somebody who's out of high school but sort of in their sort of young adulthood trying to figure out what it means to get a job in a certain sector? That just can't happen by chance. That really requires a very deliberate set of efforts by employers to structure these opportunities in ways that are really, turn summer youth experiences into a very skill-intensive program. I think it's also, I'd like to sort of echo your points about the coordination, right? We need to think about employers coming together. When we look across the country, we see a lot of work in sectors. It doesn't really work if every employer has to come to every meeting, right? Employers aren't going to like that, and none of us are going to like that by having endless meetings to talk over and over again. We have to think about what are the kind of models we can build where sectors can come and articulate, because the needs of employers across sectors are often obviously very shared, and there's a way to solve some of the collective action problems here by building a sector infrastructure that can communicate skill needs. But at its core is quite a bit about this: how do we all engage in a way that is coordinated, that gets the best outcomes?
Can I just talk about coordination? What the system really is missing also is something that connects us all. There are over 300 agencies in the city of Detroit that do workforce development, and we're not well connected. And so because so many Detroiters need so many resources and tools to really become prepared, it would be great if we had some kind of system that allowed us to case manage individuals and have navigators and coaches along the way, career advisors that map out that plan for an individual. Because if you come to Focus Hope or to Detroit Employment Solutions and we test and assess you and you read at a 4th grade level, you've got a really, really long way to go. And so how do we ensure that you stay on that path? How do we ensure that you find a way to have income coming in while you get the training and the education that you need? We work with Southwest Solutions. We have what we call an earn and learn model so that people can get training while they work. That's a model that works very, very well. But people need coaching and need support along the way. We have supportive services for transportation, for childcare. People need a lot of wraparound services to really get down that pathway, and so they need a plan, they need coaching, they need support, they need encouragement, they need so much. And so if we had a system in place that helped us know where people are in that plan, that would be helpful, because many times people come to see us and they're not really ready to go to work. They may have a substance abuse issue, they may have a housing issue, utility assistance may be needed, some human services may be needed. There's so much support that some people need to really get back on track. And so it would be great if we had a system so that when I send you to a partner, to have that barrier removed or get that assistance, I know where you are in that process, and I know when you come back to me that you've received those services. And so it would be great if we had something that connected all of us that do this work.
No, I think that's a great point. Workforce, one of its biggest challenges is that it's not something that necessarily somebody wakes up one day and says, well, now I'm ready, I'm going to go to a Focus Hope, or I'm going to go to DESC, I'm going to get trained, and I'm going to the labor market, right? We're talking about processes that take years, often involve a lot of stopping and starting. People's lives are complex. People's lives are volatile, right? What's working now doesn't work 2 weeks later. And so designing a system that can really manage that kind of complexity and volatility is a huge challenge. And again, I think it's important to be kind of clear-eyed about none of these things are easy, right? And no one actually there's not a sort of example on the shelf we can go, oh, let's go get that. Really, it's about developing this very complex muscle that says, all right, how do we help someone who looks for help right now, but then 2 months from now is going to actually just need to focus on work or focus on their kids or their parents. And they're going to be less engaged, but then they're going to return and be engaged 6 months from now. That's a big lift, and one that I think you have to keep in mind as we think about what a strong system looks like. I think strong systems often build in this kind of flexibility and this ability not to lose people. When people show back up to the system, it's able to re-engage and keep them moving. William, say a little bit about how that problem affects you. When you see people come to your door, what's good for them to have done before they get to you?
Well, that goes back to the communication issue, because most people don't know what's good for them to have done. The very fact that they show up indicate, and they don't always show up on their own. I mean, literally, we have people who are brought there by the scruff of their neck because grandma is tired of watching them sit around, or auntie has gotten fed up, or mom or dad says, you better get to Focus Hope and get a job. So there's no prescription for what it is that they should have done. We just expect the right type of attitude. Okay, the commitment to being there, to going through the training protocols and making certain that things are happening. And as was mentioned before by my other panelists here, supportive services in the course of that are extremely important. And we've got to be efficient, because in many cases, people need a job today. And when you tell them, you're only reading at a 7th grade level, it's going to take us about 8 weeks to get you up to a level where we can get you in a fully functioning training program. They quite often don't have 8 weeks to commit because they need money, they need a job today. So we've got to be sensitive to that and move them through that pipeline as efficiently as possible and do it as effectively as possible. The single most conservative department in any organization or any manufacturer or company is HR. HR does not want to waste time, and they don't want to make bad hires. So we've got to make certain that the folks that we certify are people who are prepared to step in and do the job.
So that's one sort of key challenge, is this sort of timing issue, right? I think another challenge, I'd love to have Faye talk about this, is that, it's not the case that we live in a world where all of a sudden we have 1,000 jobs. In workforce, really, it's going to be one employer realizes, oh, I'm going to have 50 jobs this quarter. Right? And then another employer 2 quarters later will, I'll have 60 jobs or 30 jobs. And so we are designing these pipelines, but the reality is there's not necessarily one big pot of gold at the end of the pipeline. There's going to be little pots, and they're all going to come at different times. So when you think about what employers can do to sort of be more engaged, have you thought at all about this kind of how we better aggregate the various kinds of jobs that are out there and make it clear to people, here's what's coming online?
I think what my other panelists have indicated, I think, certainly, again, the key is communication. Being able to communicate to the organizations that are developing these individuals what it is we need and what's our timing. It doesn't just, happen overnight, or, there are plans strategically that are always in place as we work to plan and develop the needs of our workforce. So I think communication, we have got to communication within our own sectors. I think it's important to communicate, again, in a broader base, on a broader base level. I mean, it sounds pretty simplistic, but that's not really happening right now. Right. So I think communication, being very strategic in terms of what we need, the type of skill set and what's the timeline is very important. But I also think it's important to look at the issue of accountability. I think that the employer, from employer perspective, we are going to continue to push forward in a very aggressive way in terms of how businesses are run and the employees that we hire. But the organizations that we work with, the organizations that we are funding to support all of the needs that we've been talking about this morning, one element that we want to make sure as we look at moving forward is accountability and timeline and metrics. Because at the end of the day, you can't keep stirring the soup one way and then the other, and what do you end up with? And so as we begin to think about how we sort of embrace moving forward, embrace the progress that we are seeing, that we want to continue to see, how we face the challenges that exist today, we've got to make sure that as we look at how this landscape is being created, that we include into this conversation or into this mix the important issue of accountability.
No, I think that's exactly right. The Labor Secretary, Tom Perez, has a great line about workforce, where he says the problem with the U.S. workforce system is that it's based on the principle of train and pray.
Right.
And that really captures this accountability point. We have too many resources going to training that is not really linked to employer requirements. And we've got to think about how that is in the core of what we're doing, because it's no use to anybody to get trained for skills that are not in demand, that aren't meeting employer need. So, Pam, I'd love you to talk a little bit about how do you think about this accountability issue? What do you need to make sure that what you're doing is connected to what employers require?
So Governor Snyder made sure that the workforce system across the state was a demand-driven system. There were times when we just trained and prayed and there were no jobs in that particular area. But now we focus on those sectors that are growing. And in Detroit, that's healthcare, that's IT, that's manufacturing, that's agriculture, that's energy, and it's hospitality and retail. Hospitality and retail, again, not enough of those jobs, and those are good on-ramp jobs to get people experienced and into the workforce. Not enough of those jobs. More of the high-skilled jobs, especially in IT. We have a huge demand for IT jobs in the city of Detroit. But I think we are accountable. I think we have metrics. The feds who fund us have performance measures that we have to meet. We know how to do that work, but this work is so much bigger than just the federal programs. We need so many more resources than those that the feds give us. We need many more public-private partnerships. But we're doing a pretty good job at really targeting our resources towards the jobs that are in demand and training that's in demand. We work with about 1,200 employers, most inside of the city of Detroit. We placed 13,000 individuals last year, just to give you some idea of the numbers. 25,000 people walk through our doors every day looking for resources, or they're getting unemployment benefits, and they need to know about other job opportunities that are out there. And these are credentialed, experienced. I don't want you to think that everyone that walks through the door has a fourth grade education. About a third of those 25,000 are individuals that have been laid off, and so they have credentials and education and experience, and we need to quickly connect them to even better opportunities than those that they were laid off from. So I think we're doing a much better job coordinating with all of the other agencies, and I mentioned there are 300 agencies. Many of them just do a small amount of this work, but there are probably 20 of us in the city of Detroit that really handle the real volume of individuals that are looking for resources and training. So I think we're doing a much better job focusing on the sectors that are growing, working with those employers inside of the city of Detroit. Detroit Manufacturing Systems, Andra Rush, has hired over 1,000 individuals from us. She's been a great employer partner, thanks to my board chair, Al Nelson, who's here today. And so it's about connecting those dots, working with DTE. DTE is going to have a serious skilled trades issue in about 3 years. About a third of their workforce is going to retire. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to find that pipeline of individuals that are ready to take those jobs. 10th grade math is critical. Do you know how tough it is to find someone that has 10th grade math skills that wants to be a skilled tradesperson and not go to college and be an engineer? So we've got to educate our young people. We've got to educate parents. We've got to educate principals. And information is key. Communication is key. We've got to give our young people information about career pathways out of high school. That's why they're dropping out. I think for those that heard John Bryant, hope is huge. I think the economy has been so bad for so long in Detroit, many people have just given up. Our unemployment rate is about 14%. That represents about 50,000 people. We know that there are at least 100,000 people that need to get back to work in the city of Detroit. But some have just given up and fallen out of the workforce. There's a lot of informal income in the city of Detroit. So we think many of those folks are not working, but they are. It may be illegal income. It may be underground income. But there are a lot of people, I think, with this momentum and all of the hope that we see. I think there are a lot of people that will kind of get back into the workforce and see that there are people and agencies that can meet them where they are, can provide the resources that they need and the tools that they need and help them along and make sure that they're successful and can get into a career or job that pays a wage that can support them and their family, and that's usually above $15 an hour. And we can find you a $10 an hour job all day long, but that's just not going to support your family.
So I'm going to turn to the audience in a moment for questions, but let me ask one last question. So while we're talking, get your thoughts going. Let's think about 5 years from the road. 5 years down the road, how will we know we've seen improvements? What does a strong system look like from your perspective? William, let me start with you.
Boy, you're asking me to think 5 years down the road, and I got to make payroll next week. That's always something you worry about. I think a strong system would, and Pam's already talked to it, will be well coordinated, okay, in terms of it. Workforce development agencies knowing what the other one is doing. We're not trying to replicate things. We develop areas of expertise where we can, because if you do something with a focus on continuous improvement and you do that same thing over and over and over again, you're going to get a whole lot better at it than other people might be. The communication lines will have to be robust so that people understand where they need to go to get training. The workforce system is going to have to embrace, or deal with, in some respects, this transportation challenge too. Okay, because it's something that we tend to talk about in the abstract, but it is very real to people because a lot of the jobs, the majority of the jobs, are going to be outside the city. So we're going to need to reach out, have a regional strategy in that regard for transportation to get people there. The schools, I have faith, will be better, but we're still going to have a lot of people that need services between now and then, and we're going to have to market directly to them.
Faye, your sense of what a strong system will look like?
Well, I think that I think William, really presented it very well. I would just add on to that, and I go back to the accountability point that we do have metrics, and that we all have a shared goal that we are aspiring to, and that we get moving now, so that 5 years from now we can together. And it's not just it's on the employer side as well when we talk about accountability and metrics. If we really are true to our aspirations that we are looking to as an employer group, support the revitalization of communities like Detroit, we have to do more than just talk. And so we have to we have to lean in, and we have to provide strong support to lift our cities up. So 5 years from now, I would see a very strong collaboration within the employer group to support the critical investments that are needed in the education and the training space. 5 years from now, I see a stronger support of our career and technical training programs in the city of Detroit. And 5 years from now, I would see a much cleaner and much more focused and marketed program on the value that these middle skilled type jobs will provide, and that there is an interest in securing these types of jobs.
Great. Pam, I know you've spoken a lot, but any last thoughts on what success looks like to you?
Yeah, I think 5 years from now, I hope that we have gotten the whole education challenge under control. I'm hopeful that poverty it won't go away, but it will have been decreased in the city of Detroit. Employment will be, opportunities will be there for everyone. And unemployment will be at a record low. Crime, all of this will impact crime. Our city will be safer. And I think we'll have a much better coordinated system, hopefully, and we will have evidence that individuals that come through this system have gotten the resources and information and tools that they need to be successful, and we'll have evidence of that with our outcomes. And so I'm hopeful. This is a really exciting time in the city of Detroit. The momentum is like I've never seen. I'm a native Detroiter. I was educated in the city of Detroit. I'm hopeful once again that things are about to get a lot better for all Detroiters.
Terrific. So,
Chauncy, if I could add one thing, and it dawned on me too, and I think Pam will agree with this. We need to understand where the funding is going to come from in longer chunks than just 1 year at a time. I mean, this is no way to run a system. It's no way to run a railroad. It's no way to, if you're going to plan effectively and get things done, you need a much longer runway than 1 year chunks of funding. And she's got to deal with, she doesn't know what's going to be here in July of this year until somebody releases it, okay? And we don't know because she doesn't know. All right, so what are we going to do? It's an absurd approach to this whole issue of workforce development, particularly given that we know it's a long-term challenge. We know business needs are not just there today, but they're going to be there tomorrow as well.
I think that's a great point. So let's turn to our audience. Give us your name and your organization.
Okay, my name is Susan Kruger. I'm from StudySkills.com. And I hear all of the challenges that you're sharing. So much of these challenges, of course, could be avoided or minimized if K-12 education was more relevant to what the needs of employers are. I read through this report when it first came out a month ago, and it says right here, workforce or work readiness skills, also known as soft skills, are the most influential factor in hiring decisions by local employers, even above technical skills and credentials. So I just want to share that we've actually organized a Kickstarter campaign. We have at least 65 different teachers within the city that have said, we're interested in these skills, we want to teach them. Because basically the skills that are needed in the workplace are the same skills that allow students to be successful in school. When students learn how to learn in school, they're more empowered. We have a learning literacy problem in school is really what we have. Students are not learning how to learn. So if we can teach them how to learn in school, how to communicate, how to solve problems in school, that transcends into the workplace. And so what we want to do is we want to reach out to employers and many of the people in the room here through our Kickstarter campaign to get funding to bring this program into the schools as a means of bridging that gap between what K-12 is doing and what the workforce is doing. So if I may share the URL for that, it's studyskills.com/Kickstarter. And we actually feature the data from this report in our video. There's a 5-minute video there that you can take a look at, but I have more information here I'd like to share. I just see that in all of the things that the panel has discussed today, and I've been listening for the last day, and it's frankly driving me crazy because the greatest leverage point we have to solve all of these problems, education, workforce, cohesion, is building a K-12 system that's relevant to the needs of students in the real world. And there's a lot of challenges with that. Certainly the governor, the mayor, the coalition are dealing with some of the logistical issues that are very important and necessary. But while all that's going on, there are still teachers in the classroom right now that want to make a difference. There are students, of course, that have dreams and aspirations. We've been failing them, the system in general, and there's not any one person in here. We're all struggling. And of course, the workforce needs that very sturdy pipeline. So one of the things that I'm seeing that we can get started immediately, as soon as September, is get these skills into the classrooms to the teachers that want to teach it. In the video that's on that URL, there's a teacher. All right, I'm sorry, but there's a teacher that...
I appreciate you're excited, so thanks, but that's great information, and we're glad to have you share it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to the back.
Hi, Ed Wolking with Detroit Regional Chamber. Future workforce is such a huge issue for manufacturers, which really are the basis and foundation for our economy. Do you all see any signs that organized labor is willing to work with manufacturers here on innovative and competitive compensation and training programs?
Let me turn to my panel.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Do you all see that organized labor is willing to work with employers, manufacturers specifically, on innovative and competitive wage and compensation programs?
I'll let.
Okay.
Manufacturing. I'll let
Thanks very much for the question. I am a recovering automobile executive, so had the opportunity to see the labor fights and everything else. I think labor is poised more so than ever before to work with management in developing innovative approaches. We have an excellent opportunity to bring jobs back that have gone overseas. Okay, the intellectual property, what's taking place in plants now. We don't need in an assembly plant, you don't need 5,000 employees anymore, okay, because technology has taken over and has become such a strong component of that. The value add in the labor component really comes in having middle skilled and higher skilled employees who can operate complex machinery, et cetera. And the UAW does not want to be left behind. So I think from my perspective, and in talking not just the UAW, but other elements of organized labor, they do want to work with manufacturers. So I could be wrong. I mean, we'll see what happens in the next range of talks, but I think that they're fairly progressive in that regard.
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning, Janice Green, University of Phoenix. First of all, I think the panel did an excellent job in communicating what they are doing with regards to the workforce and skilled laborers. However, we had a lot of we have tos and we need to. One is the panel's recommendation beyond what you're doing that the state of Michigan needs to do to accomplish the we have tos and we need to.
That's a good question. Yeah.
Invest more money?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, definitely. I'll
yeah, never
so
enough resources.
Those of you who know me know I jump in and say the craziest smart things and occasionally. But they got to invest. This is an investment issue. We got to invest. The state of Michigan has got to invest. These are not things that are going to go away, or we can't just depend upon the federal dollars. That's going to be inadequate. Invest, 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 and invest wisely is what I would say.
Training is very expensive. Truck driver training is $5,000. IT training can be anywhere. We're doing training for the Department of Transportation at the City of Detroit for diesel mechanics. I think the tab at the end of the day is $9,000 a person. So training is very expensive. So there are never enough resources.
I think, and also understanding that this is not just a particular individual or entity, organization, or city problem. It's all of our problem. And that we have to all come together in order to be able to identify a solution. So as we've heard throughout the conference, and we talk a lot about this one Michigan, one Detroit, I mean, we really have to understand that that's critical in order to be able to bring our state back, in order to be able to take that next step forward from an improvement standpoint. So, we look at and we hear the statistics on all of what's happening in the city of Detroit. We can't afford not to understand, we being folks that live in the suburbs, people that live in different parts of the state, that this is not their problem, this is all of our issues. So really coming together, as a community is going to be absolutely critical to address these issues. And if we don't, we can talk a lot about what we'd like to be, but we can't be what we want to be if we don't all come together to address these issues.
I would just add, I think it's true we are going to need more money, but it's also true, as William said, that if we just spend the money the way we spent it, we're not going to get better outcomes. We have to think about a stronger strategy where we have this greater alignment. And really, the biggest pocket of money is sitting actually on the demand side. It's employers who are spending really the bulk of the money around training. And so making them recognize that there's an ROI on training is an important piece of how we grow the pie. Oh, sorry. Oh, all right. Why don't we go Ron, and then we'll go to you. Sorry.
Ron Stefanski, Cengage Learning, and a returning Detroiter. Pam, you mentioned the gap between support services among 300 agencies. There was a recent article on Starbucks' efforts to offer college assistance for a four-year degree program. If you read the article in The Atlantic, what they talked a lot about was the difficulty of people completing had less to do with their ability to learn, their ability to take the courses. It had to do with navigating to a degree. And so you talked about how to create this case management coordination. Is that, from your perspective, is that an employer-led effort, or is that a workforce collaborative effort? Because I think you're right, we need the Uber of connections to bring what your agency and others are doing in Detroit together with the employer side to connect the dots. So I'm curious how you see that. Who leads that part of the effort? Because I think you're spot on with that.
So maybe before you respond, Pam, let's get the other two questions, and then we're going to have to end. So you, sir, and then over here. Let's have you add your questions in, and then we'll respond to all of them. I think, did you have a... Oh, sorry. All right, we'll do the last quick questions, then we'll have our final response.
There was a lot of conversation about accountability, and two-part. Quick, what are the accountabilities right now? Pam, you talked about the federal accountability, so what are the top two criteria there? And then if you would wave your magic wand, any of you sitting up front, what would be the top two metrics that you would want to see measured?
I'm going to get all the questions and we'll respond.
I need to write them down.
Okay, my question really follows up on that gentleman's question about 300 agencies in Detroit doing workforce development. My guess is if you added up all the budgets, it would be hundreds of millions of dollars total. And yet, Pam, when you were talking about the need for case management, to the point of where is the leadership? What are we waiting for? Who has to lead on that? Mm-hmm. There has to be set aside money from the existing budgets, because no more money is going to come through to actually make that happen. You need leadership and focus. And what are we waiting for?
All right, let's take one last question, then we're going to get the responses.
Gunder Myron, Wayne County Community College District. Of course, community colleges are right in the middle of the middle skills talent development. And several of you mentioned the need for continuing communication beyond this morning. I'd just like to offer that Wayne County Community College District could host, let's say, a middle skills summit to bring together all the people who, both on the provider side and on the employer side and on the other sectors, to really address what is our long-term strategy. Mm-hmm. I think one of you talked about the need for a shared mission, a shared vision, a shared set of goals, metrics. Why don't we take at least a small next step to bring together some kind of a middle skills summit in Detroit?
That's a terrific suggestion. Thank you. So we have a question about how we help people navigate, and then a question about what is the accountability around that navigation.
So quickly, we have assembled a workforce development advisory council. And we are looking at that data, some of the data that you saw today, and there's going to be a recommendation to the mayor about what the priorities should be in the next 2 years, some low-hanging fruit. And that case management system is one. Not sure that we could find federal dollars to support that effort, but we plan to seek dollars to support that system. And I think it would be a workforce development-led system, but the employer component would be a critical piece of that system. Karen, to your question, metrics right now, we measure how many people come into the system and how many people exit into a job. I would say we need to track job placements, of course, retention, wages, and increased education. I mean, I think those are the metrics that would make a difference. So I hope I answered those questions.
Just to add on to Pamela's comments, I think metrics could also include, again, the number of jobs, the length of time these jobs are held, and also the reduction as far as unemployment is concerned.
William, last words?
Well, to the first question, Focus Hope does have a pipeline from basic skills development all the way through college, and has been doing that for a long time. And we focus the attention there on engineering degrees, and have had students start in the most basic part of the program, because there's huge talent in Detroit that is untapped, huge potential. And I've had them go on there in engineering degrees at the University of Michigan, as an example. Okay, and that partnership is alive and well. To the second question, metrics are important, and it's not just an effort of how many people you put through, but what is the quality of your training program, and how well are they able to perform in the workplace, and employers are going to be able to tell you that. So we seek constant feedback from employers relative, and that may be somewhat soft data, but it is vital data as to how each employee is performing. And we also, if somebody loses a job through no fault of their own, we offer lifetime placement assistance because we believe in the people that we train, we believe in the work ethic that they bring to this, et cetera. To the third point, I don't think that there's hundreds of millions of dollars in the workforce system in Detroit. You know, some of these agencies that we've talked about, the 300 plus, are really, really small and are trying to do some heroic efforts. Now, where there is an extreme amount of importance is the fact that this is public-private money that have to be put together. The private sector is not going to be there for long if they don't see a corresponding effort from the public sector that makes sense. I mean, it's all in everybody's enlightened best interest. This is a win-win-win when it's done right.
I think it's about $119 million that's invested in public money in the city of Detroit.
And those dollars, there has to be alignment, there has to be knowledge, there has to be encouragement to work together, to partner, to understand that if we can leverage all of these respective pots of dollars, there's so much more that can be accomplished.
So thank you so much. I want to hand it back to Alexis to close us out.
Have a hand for our round of applause for our panelists. So what you've heard today is that it is critical for us to invest in our workforce right now. And one way you can help us do that is by joining the mayor's Grow Detroit's Young Talent program. Last year at Mackinac, he set a goal of putting 5,000 kids in jobs this summer. I'm proud to say we hit that goal of 5,000 and have surpassed it. So thank you to every single person here who helped us get there. But the reality of the matter is, 11,000 young people actually completed applications, found our website, and completed applications, making it clear that they want jobs. So 5,000 is not enough. We want to keep going. We want to make sure that every young person has an opportunity. So in front of you, you have a commitment card. I see plenty of people here who have already committed, but if you have not, please take on a kid. The city is going to be matching. We'll pay half of the cost. We are determined to make sure that we put as many young people into jobs and we invest in our talent pipeline. So you got it in front of you. If you could fill it out, come see me. I'll stand here as long as I need to, because this is something that we are absolutely passionate about and are determined to really make sure that we are protecting our future, and that begins with creating opportunities for people. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you.
Some nights I stay up, cashing in my bad luck. Some nights I call